The Jacket by Andrew Clements, Part 4. Forget about it. Friday morning was cold, complete with rain and sleet, driven by a stiff west wind. It was the kind of day when Phil rode the school bus. He didn't ride that often, so he was looking forward to it. Climbing the steps, he smiled at the driver. Then he turned and looked for a seat. He saw one near the back, but scanning the bus, he also saw something else. The whole bus is white kids. Only white kids. No, 'cause there's Julie Chin, and she's not white, but she's not black. No black kids on my bus, not even one. Phil had done pretty well until he got on the bus, because he'd been trying to forget about everything that had happened on Thursday. That's what his mom had said he should do. She'd said forget about it, so he tried. But during dinner and most of Thursday night, it was all he could think about his being white, and about feeling prejudiced. But he hadn't said anything more about it because his mom had said he shouldn't, especially not to his dad. Forget about it. But looking around, Phil tried to imagine what it would be like for Daniel if he were on this bus right now. Would that make Daniel feel weird? Or how about if I was on Daniel's bus right now? What would that be like? Page 46. Because Phil knew that Daniel's bus was practically all black kids. And the part of town where Daniel's bus was coming from, it had to be almost the opposite from his, right? Like only black families and no white families. And Phil thought, you can figure out a lot just from looking around a bus. Phil would have kept thinking about it, but his friend Lee poked him on the shoulder and said, "Hey, Phil, what'd you get on that social studies test?" So for the rest of the short ride to school, Phil and Lee talked about how boring social studies was and how stupid it was to have to learn about ancient Egypt, except for the pyramids, plus mummies and treasure and junk like that. That part was okay. Phil was glad to keep talking. For about 5 minutes, it helped him forget about all that other stuff. But after, page 48, getting off the bus, he walked up to the front steps and into the school, then turned left to go to his locker. And as he passed the big windows of the office, he glanced to his right, and he saw something that made everything come crashing back into his head. The jacket. Hanging there on the coat rack outside Mrs. Cormier's office. And you can see the picture. Jimmy's jacket. Then he thought, no, it's Daniel's jacket. There was no way Phil could avoid going past the office during his day, hurrying to math for first period. As he came to the big windows, he looked down at the floor and he counted 10 footsteps before he looked up again. On his way back to art class, he pretended the office wasn't there. He turned his head to the left and he admired the plaques and posters on the opposite wall. Page 50. Going to the library for third period reading, he studied the pattern on the shirt of the kid in front of him in line. And after library, he cut through the auditorium. He told himself it was so he could say hi to Carolyn Swanson, who was up on the stage getting ready for music class. But he knew it wasn't true. He went that way so he wouldn't have to walk past the office again. Then on his way to lunch, Phil couldn't help himself. He sneaked a look through the office window. The jacket was still there. The jacket was still there. Phil had brought a bag lunch. He'd done it on purpose, so he could just walk into the cafeteria and go right to his table and sit down and eat. He didn't want to stand around in the lunch line, just in case. Because Daniel might be looking for me, like he'll maybe try to embarrass me again. And maybe Daniel talked to all of his friends about me, like maybe they're going to gang up on me, out on the playground. Or maybe Daniel cut out my picture from the yearbook and put it on the internet. And now everybody in the world knows that I'm prejudiced, except my mom. But of course, nothing happened at lunch or at recess. Even though he kept a sharp lookout, Phil didn't spot Daniel once. That made him curious. So after recess, he went to a social studies classroom for a few minutes early. He walked to the front of the room, and Mr. Linton looked up from the book he was reading, his face lifting into a smile when he saw Phil. "How's it going, Phil?" "Okay." Phil smiled and put his hands in his pockets, trying to look casual. Mr. Linton waited a second or two to see if Phil had anything else to say, and then he nodded and he turned back to his book. Page 52. Mr. Linton's desk was messy, but Phil knew what he was looking for, and when he saw it, he knew why he hadn't seen Daniel at lunch or recess. Daniel was on the absent list. Class began, but Phil didn't hear much of what Mr. Linton was saying. He was remembering Daniel out on the playground yesterday, out in the freezing cold without a jacket. Geez, he's probably sick. He's probably got something terrible because it was so cold, like really, really sick. Or he's at the hospital or something. And if the doctor says, "How come you're so sick?" what's he going to say? He's going to say it's all because of me. And what if he dies? Oh my God. They're going to put me in prison. I'm a killer. Phil knew his imagination was running away with him, but still, he decided he had to do something. About 10 minutes before the last bell of the day, Phil got permission from his English teacher to go to the office. He said there might be a message there from his mom, which was true, because there might be one, except Phil knew there wasn't. He stopped at his locker first and got his backpack, along with his math book and his social studies homework. He also grabbed his gym bag, but he took out his shoes and shirt and shorts and left them in a locker. Phil hurried to the office. His timing was perfect. It was that quiet moment right before the end-of-day craziness begins. The principal was already in front of the school, getting ready for the bus loading. It was only Phil and Mrs. Dunn in the office, which was what Phil wanted. Page 54. Stepping toward one end of the long counter, he said, "Can I buy a pencil? I really need one for math, because Mrs. Kinnan doesn't let us use pens." Mrs. Dunn sighed and said, "All right, hang on while I get one out for you." She got up slowly from her desk and walked to the storeroom at the rear of the office, which was just what Phil knew she would do, because that's where the school store supplies were kept. And when she went into the storeroom, Phil took a quick step to the left, grabbed the jacket off the coat rack, bent down below the counter, and stuffed it into his unzipped gym bag. When he straightened up, Mrs. Dunn was coming back through the storeroom door. Phil's face was flushed. It was pink and red. But he smiled as best he could, and when when she laid the pencil on the counter, he handed her 15 cents. He gulped and said, "Thanks. You're welcome. Have a good weekend, dear. You too." Phil left the office, and as he walked down the stairs and out the door to get on bus number 7, he carefully closed the long zipper on his gym bag.